So anyone who wants to understand what happened, what didn't happen in the 2024 election, we all know the outcome, but what happened in those 107 days, what happened leading up to the infamous debate, what happened leading up to the convention, post-convention, up until election night. My next guest, they understand it better than anyone. They've written a book called Fight. This is Gavin Newsom. And this is Amie Parnes and Jonathan Allen. Amie, Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. You've written a hell of a book, and I don't say that lightly. I went through it in a quick hour and a half, almost 2 hours. And trust me, I don't read very fast, but it reads at an unbelievable pace. It's so well written. And of course, it's so familiar because I felt a little bit adjacent to so much of the subject matter, but it's 18 chapters. It's an impressive piece of work, 263 or so pages, 2 critical sections, sort of before and after, and it begins your book, Fight, on June 27th, 2024. Set the scene for me.
So the way we set the scene in the book is in Nancy Pelosi's condo. Not her condo in San Francisco, not her place in San Francisco, but in Washington, D.C. And she's watching this debate alone, sitting on her sofa, looking at the television set. And she needed to be alone because she had, I don't want to say a premonition, but she had kind of a gut feeling. Normally, if you're a politician, as you know, there's a debate night party and you go out and you talk to donors and activists and you have a good time and you celebrate and you hope your candidate wins and you say they win even if they didn't win. And Nancy Pelosi was like, I'm going to watch this at home. Yeah. And we take readers into how she had urged Biden not to debate Trump at all.
Yeah.
And she had used a nice way of saying it to him, which was, don't lower yourself to Trump. But I think, you get the feeling from the book, it's pretty strongly implicit, if not expressed exactly, that she thought this might be a problem. And we take readers around among other Democrats that had the same feeling, sitting watching at home. Jim Clyburn. Drinking Jack and Diet Pepsi.
Which just the scene with Jack and Diet Pepsi alone is worth it.
And Al Sharpton and donor John Morgan down in California. Yep. I mean, in Florida. And so they're all watching this and they all have the same reaction at the same time, which is a complete disaster. And all the Democrats are texting each other and they are calling each other. And I mean, everybody who watched that debate had the same reaction. And some of them had it in the first 10 seconds and some of them had it 10 minutes later. But I think it was immediately clear to a lot of people in the Democratic Party that Joe Biden just wasn't operable as a candidate anymore.
So, Amie, you picked that scene. Why? I mean, in some respects, that scene also picked the book, the determination that you were going to write this book. I mean, in some respects, my understanding is you weren't even thinking of writing a book necessarily on the subject matter until that debate, which sort of marked a moment of consciousness for the world, not just this country and certainly the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean, John and I were out of the campaign book writing until that night. Our phones were blowing up. And our publisher a couple of days later was like, you guys have to do another book. And so here we are. And we knew that it was going to be exciting based on what was happening that night, but we had no idea the twists and the turns of that campaign season.
I think it depends on what your perspective is as to whether it's, thrilling and exciting versus reliving some torture. Yeah. And at the same time, it's interesting. It's fascinating. The behind the scenes of how the maneuvering goes on and how Pelosi, for example, is trying to push Biden out, but trying to leave as few fingerprints on it as possible, give him room to make his own decision. Obama's calling for an open convention. I'm sure we'll get to some of this, but I think that regardless of how you feel about the outcome of the election, it is impossible to understand where the next election's going, what works for parties, what doesn't work for parties, unless you understand what happens behind the scenes. And that's what we worked so hard to get was, what were people actually thinking? What were their motivations? What were the conversations that you couldn't see on television?
And so I think the critical point, and Amie, this is to me the most fascinating, particularly sitting where I'm sitting on the other side often of some of these discussions from a gubernatorial and electoral perspective, but it's the remarkable access you have to hundreds and hundreds of people that are painting this picture and how extraordinarily well sourced you were to even have these scenes, these vignettes that have been pretty bulletproof. There's been few, if any, critics of that scene setting or anyone that suggested this book hasn't been locked down in terms of its fact checking. But this is the fourth book you guys have written together.
Book, our third campaign book. Between John and I think we pretty much have DC locked down.
Is that it? Yeah.
And people, I think, feel comfortable, which is a compliment to what we've done.
Yeah.
They feel comfortable talking to us and sharing. I mean, our job as reporters has always been to get as close to the truth as possible. And that was sort of our aim here, to bring, as John said, everyone into the room and give you a glimpse of what was happening. We all saw everything play out. We didn't know the backroom conversations. And I think that's why this book people have been so receptive. They kind of wanted to know what was going on behind the scenes. And we all knew, but didn't know.
I'm going to break a key rule here, which is to ask a question I don't know the answer to. You obviously have your own perspectives on this. You have your own experiences with what was going on during that time period between the debate and when Biden dropped out and beyond that through the campaign. Did you read anything and say to yourself, that doesn't comport with what I know or understand?
It was extraordinary how accurate it was in every way, shape, or form. And of course, but what was, for me, I think the most alarming part was trying to go, who's the source on this? Who did they talk to on this? And who's omitted, who's sort of overplayed, and how everything sort of shapes out. But, look, that experience on the 27th, that night, the debate, I was in a very different place than Nancy Pelosi and Clyburn and others. I was there expecting to go out and do the spin to talk about how successful that debate was. And I was out there doing the pre-debate spin on the networks. And so everything about what you did sort of painted a picture that I didn't have, because I wasn't privy to all of those other scenes and who was missing, who wasn't.
What were you thinking in that moment?
No, I mean, I was one of the first 10 seconds for people. I remember standing up, I looked around, and everyone looked, and we all went, something's off within seconds. And then we were just 20, 30 minutes in, and the texts were just lighting up. And you could see that with all of us that were supposed to be doing the spin. And the campaign was out already caucusing in the corner, and the debate had just begun. So it was not a gross exaggeration to say everything you painted in terms of that picture was deeply accurate. And so it's fascinating, again, just having your perspective and then the perspective of others sort of play this kaleidoscope, this sort of aggregated picture and reality. And of course, that reality came to the fore, not just that night, but the expression of so much of what came out of this book was the internal debates then. You start to talk about not just that night and Nancy Pelosi's relationship to that night, Clyburn's relationship to that night, but the relationship of the Biden campaign and their defiance after that night. They were going to stick in. They demanded loyalty. They tested that theory. Many of us were on the receiving end of that. Talk to us about those next chapters and how things began to evolve or devolve from your perspective in terms of the post-debate realities.
So I think that you make the right point, right? Biden is, to the extent that he was in a cocoon before, and I think he really was, there were not many people outside the top White House staff that saw him a lot. So for years, we would get little anecdotes of, I was with the president, it seemed a little off, whatever, but right. From a member of Congress or something who sees him once every 6 months. As we report in the book, he didn't recognize Eric Swalwell, congressman from California, who is on television literally half the day every day, and had to be cued in the summer of 2023 as to who Swalwell was when he met him at the congressional picnic. So you hear stories like that, but what happens from that moment is the Biden team digs in. Totally digs in. And he digs in. And this is somebody who has wanted to be president for his entire life, right? He first started thinking about that, if not earlier, when he first got elected to the Senate in 1972. Yeah. Which is, neither of us were born yet. And I have gray hair and Amie doesn't have gray hair, but she may soon, right? So Biden wanted to be president forever. He got the job. Yeah. He believes all the people that doubted him over the years, including Barack Obama and others, were wrong and that they're wrong again. And so he's going to fight this out. And the rest of the Democratic Party looks at him and says, like, this guy can't win. He wasn't going to. He was on track to lose before the debate.
Yeah, and you paint that picture in terms of where the polls were and things were trending prior to the debate.
And now it's unrecoverable. And then the question is, how do you ease this guy who has a big ego, who's stubborn, who has had, some sort of non-linear decline, right? Better days, worse days, better hours, worse hours.
Yeah.
How do you convince him that it's time for him to get out, especially if you're Barack Obama and the relationship there is totally tattered because Obama didn't support him in 16, didn't really support him in 20. How do you do it if you're Nancy Pelosi and you have a good relationship with him? Like,
going back decades and decades.
Decades and decades. They come from the same place, basically, in the Mid-Atlantic. They're both Catholic, both big Kennedy fans, FDR Democrats. They are close. And she's always respected Biden for getting his hands dirty in politics, for trying to get deals done. She always looked at Obama and said, this guy wants to float above and have other people do the work. And she respected Biden. She's like, how do you get rid of him? How do you push him out, but make it his idea? Make him, and so you see, and I think a lot of people are angry at Pelosi. Democrats are angry at Pelosi, voters who loved Biden and thought she did so much to push him. And the truth was, I think she was the only one that had the courage to get out there and keep moving the ball forward with little things she said on television, But I mean, it wasn't like a full-on bum rush.
Right.
So all of this is super delicate, and Biden's just not going to go anywhere. And then finally he gets really bad COVID, and the numbers are looking terrible, and House and Senate members are telling him that they're going to lose because of him. And he finally makes the decision that I think most other Democratic leaders understood was going to have to be made 3 weeks earlier. And the one thing that I think has been difficult for the Democratic Party that hasn't been talked about a lot is either Joe Biden was not competent to run for president anymore, and therefore should have resigned the presidency too, because I'm not sure you can make the argument that one is true without the other. Or the view is that it's not that he wasn't competent to run or serve, but just that he was going to lose, and Democrats decided to switch horses because they were going to lose midway through a campaign. And I think a lot of voters, especially a lot of swing voters, just were not able to reconcile all of that and think to themselves, the Democrats are telling me the truth right now.
Yeah, it's an issue of trust. And I mean, obviously that's a big part, I think, of the through line in the book. But the point you're making about Nancy Pelosi playing an outsized role here is interesting. And then just reflecting on my own conversations with former Speaker Pelosi is how sensitive she was to the appearance that she was pushing him out.
Yeah.
And how she went to great lengths. And in the book, you chronicle that. But even in the personal interactions with many of us, she would, even unsolicited, say, just so you know, I'm not pushing.
She still says that.
Still says it to this day.
Yeah.
She's very sensitive about that. But you're the firm opinion that A2 Nancy, I think, is one of the chapters in the book, that she had a big hand to play in that.
I mean, we take you inside the campaign in that moment. She goes on Morning Joe.
Yeah.
She's a little kind of disheveled for Nancy Pelosi because she's never disheveled ever.
Right.
She's a
Which is like, just got a bra strap showing. But disheveled for Nancy Pelosi is like one hair out of place.
Yeah. And she's
You're
on
disheveled compared to her.
God bless her. Jeez, I'm going to sit up.
But I mean, that moment is such a major moment. She goes on Morning Joe.
Yeah.
She says he has a decision to make. He's already made his decision. 2 days earlier, he was already in a letter was saying, I'm running. He's telling people I'm running. Don't count me out. And she's saying, no, he has a decision to make. And so we take you inside the campaign. And in that moment, they're all like, F you. What are you doing? We're finally back on track. And you're, we're regressing now. And so it's really, really kind of a dramatic moment of they're finally on track. They feel like they're finally, moving on. And she pulls him right back.
I remember that, and I remember being out on the road for Biden, and I remember being on there with Jen O'Malley Dillon. We'll talk about her role in all of this, and going on with the campaign team after that debate, doing a little Zoom, saying, let's all buck up. Here in Bucks County, I'm bucking up. We're going to make the case coming from the debate that they really did try to put everything back together and put a good face on it. Obviously, the president went back out on the campaign trail, had a few pretty good speeches, at least relative to some expectation that held things together. And then he pulled us all in, and you chronicle this with the governors. There's a meeting with all the governors, some some in person, some virtually. And you set the scene where the reception didn't go as well necessarily as some had expected. A few governors basically said, Mr. President, we may lose the Senate. We may lose our congressional seats. Tell me more about that.
So Michelle Lujan Grisham from New Mexico, who is, I think, literally half your height.
She would be proud to acknowledge, and twice as tough, by the way.
Right, but that's the thing. She gets
tough.
in there and she's basically
great.
like, we could lose a Senate race here. We could lose House seats that have been safe. We could, the whole thing could go away. And nobody's thinking about New Mexico, right? That's not like one of the swing states.
That was not on our minds when we walked in that meeting.
And certainly not the only one who expressed those kinds of concerns.
Made some points. Yep.
And not just in that meeting, but outside of that, expressing the same concern to him. States where the Democrats should not have had a problem, congressional districts where they should not have had a problem, suddenly looking, staring down the barrel of a huge problem. And maybe you should take it away. What was the rest of that
Did you say
meeting
anything?
like?
Well, yeah, I did. I mean, we all were asked, what's the advice? I said, the last thing I'm going to give is the President of the United States advice. I can just tell you what I'm hearing on the campaign trail. But it was interesting. The president, after he listened to everybody's advice, and as you chronicled quite accurately, by the way, just for the record, there is nothing in private that exists. I mean, we might as well be, we're all wired. I don't know how it's something I'm now a little more cautious reading your book, that there's not a thing that's uttered in private that ultimately won't become public.
Just save some of the good stuff for our next one.
For your next book. Yeah, no, but it is a point of consideration. But that particular meeting was there was so much that was leaked in that meeting. But you shockingly, almost down to the adverbs and pronouns, nailed aspects of that meeting. But what was, I think, omitted, not intentionally, but was sort of the defiance of the president in that meeting. He asserted himself after listening to everybody, said, I am all in, and really pushed back. And I remember, and I could be accused of a lot of things, but I don't think I was accused of not being a loyalist to Biden. And true to that form, there was sort of a pause after he said he's in, and I said, Mr. President, is it okay that I applaud? Just to have his back at that meeting. And I just felt, at that moment, there was a vulnerability in that meeting. And there was a vulnerability, obviously, the precarious vulnerability as relates to his electoral fortunes. And, I'm one of those guys, you go home with the one who brought you to the dance. That's how my father raised me.
Yeah.
I think it was literally, it's indelible in my mind. Go home with the one you brought to the dance. And so I felt compelled. That's why I went out campaigning for him the next day after doing the spin room and being out there. But you painted, I thought, a very accurate picture. So you started to see this thing start to fray a little bit. Yeah. You started to see loyalists express themselves. A few chapters in, you start talking about Nancy Pelosi, but now through her surrogates, perhaps most importantly, Adam Schiff. And Schiff shifts a little bit and says what?
It's fascinating. You want to?
No, you can go.
I was just gonna, so he's at a fundraiser on Long Island. The day that Donald Trump gets shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, basically about the same time, there's a fundraiser that Schiff goes out to do for Alyssa Slotkin and Angela Alsobrooks, who are running for the Senate for Michigan and Maryland, respectively. And Schiff gets out there and basically says what he hasn't been saying publicly to these donors, which is that Biden needs to go. And to your point, nothing's private. A transcript of his remarks magically makes it into the hands of the New York Times. I have no idea who gave that transcript to the New York Times. But if you were Adam Schiff and you wanted to make this point publicly and but didn't want to be the first person to stand in front of a microphone and say it, that might be a good way to do it. I don't know that that's what happened, but I'm just saying it might have been what happened. The thing that didn't make it out from the same event was the transcript of Alyssa Slotkin speaking right after Schiff, who is making kind of the opposite case, which is she thinks that that Vice President Harris will be problematic for candidates on the ballot, particularly for her in Michigan. She talks a little bit about why, but she's basically like she's to the left, and that's going to be harmful to some of our candidates.
Yeah.
And she says, but she's also like, she understands Biden is also potentially an anchor, but she's much clearer about Harris. And she says, we're not going to skip over a black woman for the vice presidency. So if you're thinking about some sort of like Deus ex machina, new candidate gets picked out at a open convention, you're crazy.
A Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
A Gavin Newsom.
Whitmer, many other, fill in the blank.
Jamie Pritzker, sure, anybody.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
So she's making that case, but she basically says Harris is worse. So the opposite of what Schiff says, it never leaks out until our book. And then she kind of comes to a conclusion, which is whatever we do, we have to do it now, because savaging each other within the Democratic Party is going to destroy everyone. Yeah. And she says, so we need to make a decision and quote unquote, suck it up, buttercup.
And what's fascinating is at the same time, you have Biden people, his staff out there privately sending notes to donors saying and undermining his VP and saying, look, if you push him out, you're stuck with her.
I mean, that was the hardest stuff to read.
A bad look.
I mean, you're her friend for a long time.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, 40 years, going back to before we were both into politics, before she ran for district attorney, before I ran for county supervisor, let alone mayor. Yeah. So it's difficult because there's so many aspects, and I want to get to how difficult it is because, you know, Nancy Pelosi's relationship with Kamala, and obviously that plays a big role in this book as well, but also Barack Obama's and his lack of support for her candidacy. You just referenced Slotkin, referenced some of the internal dynamics as it relates to the Harris-Biden campaign. But let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about the COVID, because I think that was a critical point where the president gets COVID. Yeah. There's a vulnerability that's expressed. Obviously, he's doing his best to put a good face on that debate, to sort of spin his way out, has a good couple, at least from my perspective, public rallies. It has an interview which wasn't as effective perhaps than it was, which became an issue. I remember the text messages coming again after that interview. I think it was with what? Who was it?
Stephanopoulos.
It was Stephanopoulos, which was fine, but people just felt like it wasn't, he didn't get out on the other side. And all of a sudden now he comes down with COVID.
Yeah.
He couldn't remember whether he had watched the debate or not.
Which was
He was
really
asked
a
that
bad
simple
moment.
question.
Yeah.
Did you watch it? And what are your thoughts about it?
I mean, I think that was sort of the nail in the coffin. And when you talk to people around him, they admit that, you know, him walking onto the plane, leaving Nevada, going home. And then he is in this very vulnerable spot where he's at home. He's surrounded by close aides. He's making the biggest political decision of his life. And, you know, when you're not feeling well, and then you're backed into a corner, that's just what happens.
And I don't think anybody knows just how sick he was. Like, he was having real respiratory problems. People were wearing masks inside his house. I mean, he was not in good shape the final weekend before he made that decision.
And he would make the case, and he made it to the governors directly, but made it very public on multiple occasions as well, that he obviously didn't feel well into the debate as well. And so, look, you paint the picture then of him sort of reflecting in those private moments back at home. You also paint a picture of Jill Biden and a Hunter Biden that played an outsized role in saying, Dad, we got this, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's Jill Biden is his strongest, most ardent supporter, obviously, and she really wanted him to. Hunter Biden, as we reveal in the book, he's playing a big role in saying, you have to do this, you've got this, pushing him to go further. And he is so dug in, you know, and stubborn. You know the president well. I mean, in that moment, he thinks he's the only one who can win. He still thinks he's the only one. He believes that.
And by the way, that's very sincere. Having proven that he could beat Donald Trump the first time, he sort of maintained that. And that was always his argument in private. Yeah. You know, whatever you say about me, you know, and he would try to be a little bit objective and have some situational awareness. I'm the guy, and he really firmly believed was the only person that could beat him.
Yeah, but undermining her at the same time. I think a lot of people in her camp were a little bit pissed off. I mean, I know we're fast forwarding quite a bit, but saying, what do you mean? You're the only one who could have won. And
let's talk a little bit about that, because I think it does connect to Jill Biden as well. You write in the book that
you can tell you've read it.
Jill Biden, I told you, I'm not making this up. It was fantastic. And people that don't care about politics or think they, you know, might or might not be interested, this paints an unbelievably accurate picture of this race, this 107-day race in particular. Of course, you go a little bit earlier to the debate on June 27th. But as it relates to the issue of some of the animus that you express as it relates to what is perceived and or is accurate about undermining Kamala Harris, who was a very loyal vice president. Yeah. And you say that in the book, that she really went to great lengths to be a loyal representative of this administration. And that Biden primarily had turned the page on any animus from the early election primary, but Jill Biden may not have, you suggest.
Exactly. She always, and this is according to sources we talked to, she always held a little bit of that sort of animosity, never really let it go.
From a debate
in 2019. You know, a lot of people, close aides, said that they didn't have a very warm relationship throughout her time at the White House. That sort of bled, you know, into this process and what was happening. But yeah, a really kind of contentious relationship.
He's still trying, Joe Biden is still trying to do cleanup from perhaps before the Trump-Biden debate, the biggest knockout punch I'd ever seen in a debate, which was Kamala Harris hitting him on busing, which is why Jill Biden hates her. One of the reasons that Jill Biden hates her. Last week, Biden did his first interview, or did his first speech. Since he left the presidency. He gets an award. And he talks about moving to Wilmington when he's a little kid. And he sees a bus full of black children go by. And he uses the term, quote unquote, colored kids. He says, what we used to call colored kids. And like, I mean, we're all roughly the same generation. Nobody has said that in our lifetimes. And so it reminds you how old he is. But when you listen to the rest of the story that he's telling, he's saying, I asked my mom, why aren't these kids going to school with me? And she says, because black children are not allowed to go to school with white children in Delaware. But decades later, Joe Biden was trying legislatively to make sure that black kids couldn't go to school with white kids. So, I mean, it's like he's still trying to do cleanup duty from what happened on a debate stage with her in 2019. And of course, stumbles all over himself in doing it.
All right, so we move forward as we stumble forward in figurative sense, and we fast forward the decision to step down, and you paint this picture minute by minute, quite literally minute by minute, the inside of the conversations, which is I still, back to everyone being wired, the conversations between the president and the vice president saying, are you sure, Mr. President, sort of maintaining that loyalty and firm footing, and then immediately organizing, independent, it seems, of her in another room, her sort of
in the pool house,
in her pool house with Tony West, her brother-in-law, and the rest of Camelot, and we'll talk about that in a moment with a K. The team to start organizing immediately a strategy to get people on board. But first, Kamala Harris tries to get the president on board. Tell me about that.
So let's start with the pool house, because they're meeting ahead of this call. And, you know, she's in a very precarious spot coming into that moment. She's basically telling everyone, and she's very loyal to him. But at the same time, she has her closest advisors meeting in her pool house at the Naval Observatory, trying to plan what to do
just in case.
And let me just interrupt you there for 1 second, which is, we asked one of our sources, we said, what are the odds that all of these people are meeting in the pool house out next to the pool at the vice president's residence? Like her two chiefs of staff, Mignon Moore is like running the convention, is like zoomed in. Tony West is in there. Brian Fallon, the comms guy. Like, we're like, what are the chances that they're there and she doesn't know what? And the person who talked to us said, you think there's anybody in the vice president's pool house? The vice president doesn't know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
So just
no. So they're all gathered there when the call comes in.
Yes.
And so they're alerted to the call. She is on the call with the president, essentially saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" And he says, "Yes." And she says, "Okay, are you going to endorse me?" And he says,
"You have my support, kid."
You have my support, kid.
Yeah. And she knows that that's not really an endorsement. I mean, you've been in politics long enough. And so she pushes him. And he says, I'm going to endorse you, but later. And think about that moment. Think about where the party is in that moment.
If you don't hear the E word, it's basically the F word, right? Yeah. I mean, if you're in politics and you ask for an endorsement and you don't hear endorsement back.
Yeah. Even if it's Wednesday and we're on Sunday.
So they were talking about doing it literally not that same day.
No,
Biden
later
was
in
saying,
the
I'll
week.
do it later in the week. So
Yeah.
quite literally a few
And people
days
are
later.
licking their chops, like wondering, is this going to happen?
Yeah.
Should I enter? She's trying to get all the support.
You don't know anybody who was thinking about these things or talking about these things.
No,
do you?
nothing about it. And so at that moment, I mean, so she to her credit.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a serious moment. I mean, and she's obviously preparing for this moment, to be fair, along the lines of the picture you paint.
But quietly.
She's
not doing anything like that undermines him.
And by the way, that's an important point, and I can only attest to that too, again, being sort of adjacent to all of this. Yeah. They were either extraordinarily careful in that respect, or they were so deeply loyal. It could be both and it appears perhaps both and. But there was never a sense that she was trying to undermine it. And I could just lay claim to that in terms of personal interactions and everybody around her, of which, have one degree of separation. We'll get to some of those characters in a moment. So she presses the president, and the president agrees that later in the day, or at least one of his advisors, as you paint in the book, decides we'll tweet something out.
But this requires 2 phone calls to get to that agreement.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is interesting, right? Like they get off the phone and they're still not in agreement about this. He says it's Sunday and he's like, maybe like Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah.
And she's like, you have to endorse me now. Everyone's going to get out of the gate. They're going to be calling their people. They're going to be trying to pick up delegates. If you get out of the race and you don't endorse me for 4 days, that's 4 days of everyone thinking that you think that I'm not good enough to be president of the United States. And you picked me to be your VP, which is her leaning on him, right? A little bit saying like, you can't.
Your judgment's at stake here, sir.
Right. And so they get off the phone and her people draft up a statement for him to give and send it over. And then finally they get back on the phone and go, it's sort of like Biden, like, I'll do a statement about me and then I'll do a statement about you later today. And she's like, please be like 5 minutes later, But the thing is, even within that, I mean, there's this incredible tension where Joe Biden is focused on taking a victory lap as the guy that magnanimously got out of office. And I think you look, it looks like you can understand, like, he's been president of the United States. He's not going to run. He thinks he's the guy that can win.
Jonathan, I have such deep emotions about this because I remember getting. And first of all, I remember two things, Kurt. Why I felt, just full disclosure, a little bit of disappointment not getting heads up, because all of a sudden just appeared on my feed. I'm like, what? I mean, literally, I remember exactly where I was.
Where were you?
I remember just down the block. I was on a walk.
You're governor of the 5th largest country in the world.
Yeah, right? which fine. But I was out there. I was hustling. I was out there when it was a little lonely after that debate, and I was out there doing these small, 4th of July, events, and it was 50 people, and I'm just, I'm trying to do that, be a father, and do my day job as governor of California. And look, the way it played out actually made me feel better because there were a number of others that didn't get heads up as well. I understood it, but I also understood the gap because I remember wanting to we put out a statement. Immediately, everyone starts calling. Those are text messages.
I think I might have tried to text you that day.
But there was a moment where, for me, just personally, I thought he needs his space so we can talk about him, not talk about who's next.
Right.
And so I understood that gap, and I understood from his perspective, I totally understood it. This wasn't about the next thing. This was about the end of his presidency and his public service. And he needed that grace and space. And I remember we were putting together a statement no sooner than that I started to get some phone calls from the same person that was making calls, according to your book, to many other governors and elected officials across the country by the name of Vice President Kamala Harris.
And what did she say?
Well,
we're journalists.
We're reporters. We have to ask questions.
Yeah, you already. So she was making those phone calls, and she had that list ready to go, and she's picking up endorsements at a fevered pace. And within a couple hours, we had endorsed. Once we had sort of reflected on a little space, put out a statement for Biden. We're in. Other governors in. You talk about Clyburn, he's in, but someone by the name of Barack Obama is not necessarily in. And there's a phone call, I think, forgive me if I'm off, at 5:30 p.m. to Clyburn. Yeah. Former President Obama wants to make it. Clyburn knows exactly why he's calling. Clyburn does what?
He quickly gets behind her because
he knows
Obama's going to call him at 5:30, and he says to himself, I have to get behind her before this Obama call. And so Obama does call him and he says, I've gotten behind Kamala. And the call lasts less than a minute.
But Obama at like 5:30 that afternoon, so like 5 or so hours later, 4 hours later,
about 5 hours.
He's still trying to like plan this like mini primary with an open convention.
Let's back up, and I didn't.
Did Obama call you? I'm curious.
He didn't call me directly. But,
not directly.
No. But this notion of a mini primary plays obviously a big part of the, and it was sort of a big revelatory part of your book that people are like, whoa. Yeah. Interesting. Didn't know. We knew a little maybe about Pelosi's role, perception, reality there, but Obama playing that role, not of immediately endorsing the vice president, as Biden eventually did, but wanting a mini primary. And then also floating names like Whitmer and Moore as president and vice president, just to sort of tease out what he thought would be a very strong ticket, but not Harris. Bring me into understanding the history there, because I recall, wasn't that long ago, that Kamala Harris decided not to support Hillary Clinton, not an indictment, but decided, interestingly, after being very close to the Clintons, we'll get to that in a moment, but going to the kickoff of Obama and his presidential rally, but it didn't seem that relationship was as strong as some of us had understood it to be.
Yeah, I think that, number one, I don't think Obama ever saw Kamala Harris's endorsement of him as important as Kamala Harris saw her endorsement of him, which I guess at some level is understandable given where she was in the world where he was.
He's running president.
Right. So, but I think that she always wanted a closeness to the Obamas, and they never felt it. And it's interesting. I think maybe best said as emblematic is the only time you really heard Barack Obama talk about Kamala Harris before she became a vice presidential candidate.
In your book, when you state, he said,
she's the best looking attorney general in the country, which, by the way, is not a high bar. No offense to attorney general.
But it was in your book, you react, you reflect on the fact she did not react.
She did not react
as quickly or as well as, but she also didn't say anything publicly, which may have created some rifts.
Right. She let him hang there for a while. Right. She let him twist. And like, I mean, anybody's advisor would advise them to, maybe take a breath. Let that sit out there for a while. Let the news media keep writing about it because it's elevating her.
It certainly did.
And at his expense, a lot of attention. Right?
Yeah.
And I am certain, without having spoken to Michelle Obama directly about this, but having spoken to other people, Michelle Obama was not a real big fan of that moment.
And you write that in your book.
Her husband said that.
I know.
But I also, the other interesting thing that's going on here is, so there's this sort of background, like she's always wanted more from them. They don't love her. They're not showing her the love.
Yeah.
Election night, for example, she goes and wants to get into it's 2008. So he wins and they have a family and friends tent.
So you paint this picture as well. Tell us more. And so all the closest members of the Obama team and family members.
Family and friends are in a tent. She tries to get into the tent and is turned away. But has a kind of fascination with Obama world. Even as VP, wants to invite the pod save guys over, wants to always make sure that the Obama world people are included.
Yeah.
So she's really hurt in that moment.
I get it.
And we're told by sources.
I was hurt reading this. I mean, honestly, I didn't fully, it's interesting for what I believed was some insight on all this. I didn't appreciate that riff was as real and raw, particularly with David Plouffe, and we'll get to David coming on board the campaign a little bit later. But keep going, please.
But no, it needs mending, their relationship. And this is sourced to people who know exactly what's happening. So it's not like we're just making this up, but she was really hurt. And so it needs a couple of calls between her and the former president to kind of come together to kind of understand what had happened. But she really, really was leaning on his support. And in that moment where she's making all the phone calls right after Biden says, I'm going to get out, she's making all these phone calls. She gets Biden's support and gets him to agree to endorse her on the phone.
Yeah, huge. By the way, game changer.
Right.
That's a game changer.
All those delegates are his.
Changer. Yes.
Yeah.
Right? They all got elected to be delegates.
And you get Clyburn, you get him. And then all of a sudden, to your point, all the delegates are his. You get the whole operation. She's now able to sell the operation.
And it's
turnkey.
Bill and Hillary Clinton within an hour or so.
And then Bill and Hillary Clinton.
Right? I mean, so
which is,
now you've got 2 of the 4 living presidents.
There you go.
And Jimmy Carter's endorsement, God rest Jimmy Carter's soul, but his endorsement is no longer something you're negotiating on day one.
Yeah. No.
And then she gets Obama on the phone, and she wants his endorsement. And he says, I'm not going to put my thumb on the scale, which is, of course, is exactly putting his thumb on the other side of the scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
especially later in the week, too. It takes him several days to get there.
Yeah.
And then they do this kind of cringy video.
Very awkward call.
Which you said was set up, and she had to act like it was a surprise. And there's some discrepancy you describe who really set it up, who didn't set it up. What do you make of all that? What do you make of your own discrepancy as you describe?
Well, sources told us
sources
that basically, I think Jen O'Malley Dillon, who was running the campaign, thought that there was an opportunity to get a viral video, make some money, and not for her personally, but for the
fundraising,
campaign, for the campaign, because remember, the donors had choked off Biden, like the donors to his super PAC, Future Forward, had choked off the money.
Yeah.
Nobody was setting up fundraisers for him.
Another pressure point and one of the reasons he decided to drop.
Right.
Yeah.
He didn't have the money. They thought it might come back if he stayed in, but they weren't sure when. They're looking at red ink. They're worried about potentially making payroll, even though this is a campaign that is likely to raise, $1 billion plus, ends up raising about $2 billion. But in that moment, they're short on cash. And it's like, well, if we can get these two to do something that's kind of viral, we can do it.
Yep.
But Michelle Obama doesn't want to go on camera. Barack Obama doesn't want to go on camera. So it ends up being their voices talking to her, taking a phone call. Yeah. She's smiling. It's so phony looking. And I think the irony of that is that for the most part, we actually see get what we see with Vice President Harris, like good, bad, and different. Like she seems to me to be one of the more authentic people at that level of national politics, in that there's not, I don't know. I just don't it seemed so packaged and so phony for someone who, you see when she's not, when she's struggling to do things. You can see when she's not comfortable in something.
Right. She wasn't happy in that moment,
no.
though.
You can feel it.
Yeah, her aides kind of told us as much, that she knows you have to be authentic in politics, and she knows that it's a very staged call. She's not happy about how it's playing
just
out.
The whole idea of it. I get it. And it's particularly after, as you've written, and now we've learned what didn't happen the days prior, leading up to that. So let's fast forward a little bit. That's basically the first half of your book. You lay out sort of this moment, and then we pivot into the second half of the book. And you pull in Mar-a-Lago versus Camelot, as you describe it in one chapter, what's going on in the Trump campaign at this moment. They seem a bit surprised that it was that quick, right, to shift and transfer overwhelming support pretty quickly, with a few exceptions. And you chronicle one governor in particular, not even consequential in the context of the overall support she was getting. The momentum was there, it was real, and it was enthusiastic. And the folks out down in Florida were feeling slightly anxious, curious. Give us a little bit of insight into how the campaign of Donald Trump, Las Avitas, Wiles, were feeling, Trump himself at this moment.
It's a low moment for them.
Yeah.
They are sitting there looking at the vibe, if you will. They see that Democrats are actually excited for once. They weren't getting that from them at any point. And here they are. Huge convention, a lot of momentum. She's raising a lot of money. She is attracting big crowds. Biden isn't getting those crowds, wasn't getting them before. So he's wondering, what do I need to do differently? Do I need to shake things up? Do I need to bring back the people from my past?
And there's one particular character you referenced in the book by the name of Corey Lewandowski. And he appears again. And he appears as an irritant of sorts to the two folks, the loyal soldiers, Las Avitas and Wiles, who had been running this campaign in a way that a lot of folks were pretty impressed by, particularly by Trump's standards. I don't know if we're grading on a curve or not, but it seemed to be a well-managed campaign, a little different than the campaign 4 years prior.
Trump is Trump, and there are different shades of Trump, but you pretty much know where you're going to get, which is something different every time you see, and definitely attracting news, and sometimes undercutting himself and whatever. But the question is, what does the campaign do beneath him, right? Are they able to react to him in ways that support him winning, or do they devolve into chaos because they can't figure out what he's doing? And we've seen option B a lot, in his first presidency, even a little bit in the second presidency, and in his previous campaigns. This time, Wiles and LaCivita, who didn't really know each other before this election, but are both seasoned campaign professionals.
And just so paint the picture, because people know who the heck LaCivita. This is the guy who did Swiftboat against the Kerry campaign many, many years ago. In political terms, this guy is as tough as it gets. Brass knuckles.
Yeah,
Smart
no,
guy.
if you're in a trench somewhere, first of all, he's a veteran, but like if you're in a trench somewhere in politics, like you want that guy, like he's going to fight.
And meanwhile, Wiles is a well-respected operative in Florida that's managed a lot of campaigns, including former governor or current governor, but formerly for Governor Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, the daughter of Pat Summerall, former
the
football broadcaster
Pat
and player.
Summerall.
Yeah, legendary Pat Summerall,
Yes.
who I am sure called many San Francisco 49ers
with,
games.
Mr. Madden, thank you, sir. Yes.
But Susie is somebody who has been involved in politics for her entire career, and she is in her like mid 60s now. And she like got her first job in the White House, in the Reagan White House, like kind of early in life. Worked at the Labor Department for him, and then went to Florida and worked for mayors in Jacksonville, right?
Yeah.
And like really sort of got to understand politics from the ground up too.
Yeah.
Ran some high-profile Florida statewide campaigns, DeSantis, and she manages well. She's just a good manager.
Well respected. You hear that across party lines. People do not underestimate her, and one should not. She's current chief of staff of President Trump.
Yeah, and so Lewandowski comes in, and he ran the 2016 campaign for Trump until he got booted from that, sort of toward the end of the primary. And he comes in and he does what everyone does in Trump world, which is when they sense a little blood in the water and Harris is rising in the polls and Trump's falling back a little bit. And it's at this moment in like September, even into early October, it's basically a dead heat.
Yeah.
And Trump is furious about this because he had beaten Biden.
Yep.
Right?
He felt it was over, clobbered him in the debate. In fact, you even paint a picture in the debate. He kind of even was a little more empathetic. He decided not to go in for the kill.
Yeah, he backed off.
Even backed off. Even Trump during the debate you describe.
Some kind of combination of him recognizing that, in this moment that like Biden is wounded and there's no need to kick him, and also understanding the political backlash of, as he puts it, looking, he doesn't want to look like as he's thinking.
So this guy's, he's feeling everything's going in his direction. This thing's a walk. And now all of a sudden he brings in the old pro to sort of stress test his old buddy, Lewandowski, that's going to come in and it's going to look under the tires, because one of the vulnerabilities and one of the things Trump doesn't like, you describe in your book, is wasteful spending, profligacy. And it appeared, at least to Lewandowski and some of the critics out there, that LaCivita had banked a little too much, 20 plus million or something.
Well, that's just like, that's an absurd amount. I mean, just think about like the idea that some campaign staffers got $22 million coming in. It's just like on its face absurd. But this is the stuff Corey Lewandowski is, using against LaCivita and against Susie to some extent. Like the argument that Lewandowski is making to Trump is the reason that you are having trouble right now politically, the reason that Kamala Harris is rising or falling, is that these guys are mismanaging your campaign. And Trump that's the kind of thing that usually gets Trump to act. And Susie and Chris go to Trump in Mar-a-Lago, unbeknownst to Corey, and they sit down with them and they lay out what all the campaign spending is. And I think they lay out a little bit of who Corey is. And they all get on Trump Force One, and Trump calls Corey over and just, like a schoolboy, he's like at one point, like kind of kneeling at the table.
You literally describe him kneeling at the table.
And Trump, looks at Lewandowski and he points to Susie and Chris and he goes, "They're in charge.
And you're going
to New Hampshire," which is not
what you're supposed to be doing.
Right. Corey's from New Hampshire, at least, right? But basically, like stop, like go away.
Go away.
Like, love you, Corey, great guy. Glad you support me. Go somewhere else.
But for anyone who thinks that we just focus on the Democratic train wreck.
No. So, this is it. As sort of we pivot now into section 2 of your book. Now, all of a sudden, we start to pull Trump into this narrative. And of course, that anxiety. But he sticks with his team. And he shows, as you suggest in the book, a maturity in terms of a discipline of the campaign that may not have been as present.
I think
in his first campaign.
I think 2020 had an effect on him. I think he learned some lessons from it. In this moment and in others, he chooses stability over chaos for the purpose of winning the presidency. We do not always see that now that he's in his second term, and we often see the opposite of that. But for that moment, he's got to win this race, and he lost in 2020, and it burns him. And he's trying to stick with the things that he think, dance with the one that brought you.
Yep.
He's doing that with these campaign folks. And you even see it in the policies that he chooses, where his aides are giving him strong advice on, say, a national abortion ban, where they say, they have to do a slideshow for him. And they're like, here's what the abortion laws are in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, these swing states. And if you do a national abortion ban, you're taking abortion rights away from women in those states. But if you don't support it, their rights stay the same. And therefore, you're taking it off the table as an issue in those states, or at least for a lot of the voters, right? So you see him kind of learning from the last time. He supports early voting in this election, which he doesn't believe in, which he's going to try to take away now that he's president. Yep. But he is told you get to bank the vote. So again, this money thing, it's like once you have a vote in early, you don't have to spend money to convince that voter anymore.
So you describe, and as we move further into the book, we have this dialectic between the Harris campaign and the Biden campaign, and this notion around change. Obviously, every election's about change, or allegedly every election's about change, but it's difficult. You have a sitting vice president. It's been endorsed by President Biden, deep pride in the work that President Biden's done, in his legacy. He wants that legacy maintained. You describe Trump showing a little bit, I'm not going as far as sister shoulder moment, but shows some dexterity, a willingness to sort of shift in terms of policy principles on the national abortion ban, kind of break with some of the mainstream of his party, more of the conservative elements of his party. But Harris had a more difficult time in that space. You describe a moment in time that was indelible for many people, and that was her appearance on The View.
Yeah.
Take us through.
So we should start by saying that her aides had prepped her for this moment that she's about to be asked on The View. She's asked, what would you change about, Biden's presidency? And she says, not a thing, essentially.
But she was prepped for that question.
She was prepped for that question.
Well, was that the answer?
It was not the answer. She was supposed to say that, but, and I know you know this more than anyone, she was supposed to pivot forward and say, but, the future is going to look a lot different. And so when she says it, her aides are all like, what just happened? We prepped for this moment. And they can't believe, and that moment, the Trump campaign was looking for something in her words to kind of make that point, to say, in a change election, she is exactly what we just had. And here she is saying it.
Right.
And they put out an ad a few days later. I'm surprised it even took that long, but they put out an ad essentially saying, no, it's going to be exactly a rubber stamp of more of the same.
And this is at a time when the right track, wrong track of the country was way off, and all the inflation scars, and including, across the spectrum, people really were looking for fundamental change.
So what a weird spot for her to be in, because, she was always trying to prove that she was a loyalist. And here she is. She is a loyalist. She's very loyal to him.
She was very loyal, publicly, not just privately, in that respect, and express that. And you paint a picture, and I think the outcome of the election may suggest that she did that at her own peril, own electoral peril. But
and with Joe Biden, pardon me, Governor, with President Biden breathing down her neck over and over and over again, saying, "No daylight, kid." He says it to her on,
and that's an exact quote. No daylight, kid.
The day of her debate with Trump, and this is the thing he's been telling her for years: there should be no daylight between us. Meaning, you don't undermine me. You're my vice president.
Yeah,
you don't undermine me.
Well,
you don't
she's
show
damned
any
if she's. I mean, you know what? I'm not a political pundit. I'm not an advisor. I don't even play a good one as a governor, trying to be objective. But what the hell are you supposed to do? The minute she deviates from them, they'll pounce, and they'll show all the videos of her shaking her head, standing behind him at the podium when President Biden makes an announcement. It's a very difficult position. And presumably they thought, and I say they, because David Plouffe now appears in the picture. An old hand, obviously one of Obama's principal consultants and campaign strategists. They merged with Jen O'Malley Dillon, who was running the Biden campaign. They try to integrate the two. They have a long-standing relationship, Plouffe and O'Malley, and so they're dancing. this dance, but they see the crowds. They see Kamala Harris up there, a woman, African-American. She has changed. She seems to be the personification of change. They can make that case maybe without even making the case that it's imbued.
But that's what they did with Obama in 2008, right? In 2008, which was also a change election, and George W. Bush was deeply unpopular, and there was a financial crisis in the middle of that campaign. And they couldn't have known that when they started with Obama as change, but they knew Barack Obama represents physical change. You can see the change. You don't have to say it. They don't ever have to talk about his skin color, right? They don't have to talk about his name, like whatever. They know that was their 2008 campaign. This is 2024, and you have the same people running a campaign with the same concept here that people are going to look at her and say, well, that's the change I'm looking for. Like, it's just, it's as if they didn't watch the last 16 years of politics or so, and they're running cookie cutter campaigns that rely on like sort of this this crazy like sort of data analysis as your strategy. And the thing that I always come back to as emblematic, not necessarily causal, is the trans ad that was run against Harris.
So let's talk about that because you just brought up the issue of data, and it plays a big role in your book. You really analyze that. I mean, you sort of lay out how analytical this campaign was, and the utilization of this $1.5 billion, the $2 billion that was the overall spend in this campaign, and how those researchers were put to work. And it was to your point, data-driven campaign, and decisions were made or not made on that basis. And you just referenced an ad. I had an interesting Oval Office conversation, or at least with the chief of staff while I was waiting to see President Trump in the Oval Office with Las Avitas, and we talked about this ad.
I think you should tell that story now.
No, and they lay out what they perceived as a weakness, and they asked me, as someone from California, intimately familiar with some of the ongoing of the campaign, why didn't she respond more forcefully? And in your book, you answer that question. You pose it and answer it by saying, well, the data bared out we didn't need to answer it.
Bill Clinton calls. He's in California. He's watching the ads play out, and he picks up the phone and he's trying to reach anyone who will anyone who will
but he
be
finally
receptive.
Gets in touch with
Jen O'Malley Dillon.
Yep.
And he says, what's going on? Every time I'm at a rope line, I keep hearing from people, are they going to respond to this? He's watching it.
And the ad is they, them, trust. So it's an ad, a
most
video.
Potent ad.
Yeah. So she's in a candidate interview during the primary for the original election or the old election. And she's asked a question around trans surgeries. Right. And so there's a video of her expressing her policy point of view. So it's not assertion. No. It's an actual video. And the Trump campaign decides to play this up. And it's on every sports program. They're targeting young men. We'll get to that issue of gender in a second. And it seems to be very effective. And based upon what I heard directly from the source, they said it was not just effective, it was off the charts effective. But the data wasn't bearing that out.
That's what
in
she
the Harris
tells.
campaign.
That's what Jen O'Malley Dillon tells Bill Clinton when he calls up and he's like, "What's going on?" But the data says
the trans ad is not effective against Harris, and even more than that, they test their responses with focus groups and decide that none of the responses are effective. And like, I don't think you have to be a political genius I'm sure you watched that ad the first time watching the World Series or a football game or whatever, and your jaw dropped and you were like, wow.
What did you
tell me
think?
if you felt differently, but like.
I was with the Clinton camp.
At the time.
And we not only was I at the Clinton camp, full disclosure, we started doing our own research. This, of course, happened. And the research was self-evident. There was already articles coming out that this was a policy that existed when Trump was president of the United States. So there you have a vulnerability. He's attacking the vice president for a position that he was allowed to advance as president. So you had an opportunity to push back there. But also we started doing our own research because this was at CDCR in the state of California. What's the origin story of this policy? Was there a settlement? It was court-imposed settlement. She was AG. She was compelled to advance that settlement based upon a judge's decision. And so all of these areas of opportunity to push back. And I think we all expressed strong opinion. I'll leave it at that in hope and expectation. But they chose not to.
Did you get a similar response?
We just, I got to not. How about this? Not dissimilar response. Is that a politician trying to answer a question?
It's fair. I think we got it.
But it was interesting. It played it goes to some of these key moments, because you mark this as a key moment, and you mark that David Plouffe came in saying this is election all about key moments. It's about debates. It's about the convention. It's about these sort of magical moments that move in your direction or in the opposite direction. But that seemed to play it outside, because they put, $30+ million into that one ad alone, correct?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact amount, but it was a ton, because it was playing everywhere and it was playing nationally, right? It's playing, again, the World Series, NFL, like Monday Night Football, right? I mean, it is hitting a ton of viewers and hitting them over and over and over again. And I think one of the things that's sort of interesting about this, I would just take this sort of data thing. I mean, look, you're watching football, they tell you to go on 4th and 2 because the data tells you to go, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? But if you're the coach, you should know my offensive line is actually kind of, they're huffing and puffing right now, and the quarterback's got a bad ankle, and maybe even though the data says I should do it, I'm watching reality.
Yeah.
So you see the trans ad, and it's like her own words. It's like 4 or 5 different positions, right? State-funded trans surgery for undocumented immigrants who are in prison.
Yeah.
And the they, them versus he's for you.
He's for you. What a tagline.
What a tagline. I mean, probably the most potent political ad of the last several cycles.
And so you'd be hard pressed to disagree.
So I go back at this data stuff, and I'm like, so where does this come from? And I think it's this myth that grew out of 2008 that Barack Obama's campaign team made Barack Obama president. And there was a whole lot written. There were magazine articles and books and about how the brilliant people around Barack Obama made him president. And none of it stopped to say, maybe Barack Obama was a unique political talent. B, maybe he was running an election where there was a super weakened incumbent party, right? I mean, it was all like, oh, we had this great data team. That must be why he won.
Interesting.
And I'm like, I don't know. Is that really your conclusion for why Barack Obama was president of the United States? It's not mine.
You're talking about my friends here, Jonathan. David's a good friend.
By the way,
I'm not they're incredibly talented, but I appreciate your point.
I'm not knocking
the broader point about, what lessons we learn and who is, I mean, it is a great point. I mean, is it the candidate or is it the campaign?
Well, and I would go back to David and I would say, I'm not knocking David. David was the campaign manager on that 2008 campaign. They ran a really good campaign. It's the people that come out of that learning oh, it must have been this. I don't think if you talk to David Plouffe, he would tell you Barack Obama was president of the United States because David Plouffe's a genius. No. And I'm not saying David Plouffe isn't a genius.
He would never acknowledge that. No.
Right. So but I do think that you come down a generation or two and the people that worked on that campaign or around it kind of draw some of the wrong lessons.
And things evolve.
I'd be one of them, right? Yeah. I mean, I would revere that insight they would have, and as a candidate, I would look to and you would be remarkably deferential. I mean, and look, she had 107 days. This thing, and by the way, I thought, I humbly submit, I thought she ran under the circumstances, a pretty remarkable campaign. But you paint a few circumstances that test that theory. And one of them, as we move towards 270 and getting near page 268, the conclusion of your book, 270 electoral votes I'm referring to, is Texas. Yeah. All things Texas. This notion that, all right, he's playing these ads, he's going after young men. Trump's also sort of playing into an archetype and a cultural thing. He's got Hulk Hogan there. He's got him ripping off his shirt. He's got Dana White. He's at UFC events. He's going because Barron, at least Trump claims, Barron says, hey, there's this thing's podcast. You should go on them, Dad. And he starts going on all these folks. And then there's this guy by the name of Joe Rogan. Rogan plays a seemingly outsized role, not just in the campaign, but also in your book. Yeah. Texas Hold'em.
Yeah. So this rally happens in Texas and everyone's questioning, why is she going to Texas? We're in the final on a Friday night.
In October.
Democrats will take back Texas.
No, but Friday night lights.
Come on, I'm with you. It's near the end of the campaign.
There's high school football in
There's some tonal issues there. God bless.
Yeah, but she goes there, and everyone's like, "Why? Why not Pennsylvania? Why not anywhere else?" She's in Texas.
Yeah.
We find out in this book, we do reporting. They move they create this entire rally to be in Texas on Friday night. Because they want to be within striking distance of Joe Rogan's podcast. He doesn't go anywhere.
He's in Austin, Texas.
In Austin.
He
You
is
have
not
to come
flying
to him.
anywhere. Trump had to go visit him. You, Madam Vice President, will visit him.
Yeah, and so they are in this back and forth with his people. When do we go? When a huge back and forth. They finally say they're trying to arrange one date, and finally, this is at the end of like a huge back and forth, and they finally come to the conclusion that, he is taking a personal day.
So Rogan tells the Harris campaign,
According to
his
our
folks,
sources.
according to your sources in your book, he's not available that Friday because he has a personal day. It turns out
President Trump is there on that day.
So he had, and presumably that personal day was already filled, locked in with former President Donald Trump in person for a 3-hour sit down with Joe Rogan. Meanwhile, Harris is there on a Friday night expecting Beyonce to come out to sing, and Beyonce comes out and
does not sing. And we ended up,
but you rightfully make the case. Beyonce is not a bad.
It's not a bad segment.
No, it's about as good as it gets. Right, even you acknowledge in your book.
No,
it's
please,
Beyonce.
When my wife and I renew our vows, hopefully Beyonce will come sing at the,
well said.
At the ceremony.
But there was some expectation, worst case, because she's going to come in and sing. She ends up just giving a speech.
She just gives a speech. And so,
which is wonderful, nonetheless.
I'm sure she would love to have had Beyonce give a speech anywhere, anytime. Not a lot of swing voters in swing states at the Texas rally watching Beyonce, right?
But explain, by the way, for those that, I never knew this. I was wondering, so you paint this, for those who are wondering, why didn't she go on Joe Rogan? There was a lot of effort the Harris campaign made to try to go on. There was sort of negotiation, there were logistics, and there was this sort of anchor event that would lead to conclude that she sincerely wanted to go on the Rogan show.
I think she sincerely wanted to go. There was internal debate within the campaign about whether to try for that or not.
Yeah.
And the people who wanted to won out in that debate. But it was not like a 95-5 decision. It was like a 51-49. But once they committed to it so much so that they literally put her in Texas in October in the stretch run of the campaign for a rally, and said that it had to do something with abortion rights. We can do an abortion rights rally anywhere. Right. Texas is a big state, matters for that.
Yeah.
Whatever the cover story was. I actually think that what happened here is that there was some interest on both sides. They had a negotiation and it fell through. And then, there's some finger pointing on both sides because I think both sides legitimately had some interest in doing it. And sometimes things fall apart. But the fact that they made this entire rally and, to try to get this done when it wasn't already like signed, sealed, and delivered it's kind of jaw-dropping.
So the Rogan thing plays an outsize, and the idea, and the people can go to what happened, why did she lose? Was it the view, the unwillingness to separate from someone that was difficult to separate from because he didn't want her to separate and she wanted to express loyalty? Was it the nature of incumbency, and there's an incumbency penalty of sorts, and you saw that globally, though not exclusively globally, but you saw it in a lot of other countries. Was it inflation? Was it immigration, which obviously played a role in this campaign? Was it interest rates, which people often forget about, car loans and home loans, mortgage rates and the like? But all this time, she wasn't thinking about that. She was confident she was going to win.
She goes into election night thinking she's going to win. Same with Tim Walz. So much so that when they're told, they can't believe it. They can't find the words.
And so you describe those two scenes of Tim Walz getting alerted that they've lost, but also Kamala Harris being told that she's not going to win. They had prepared in every way, shape, or form, confident. You got that Iowa poll you highlight, and we all felt it. I felt it.
Did you think this was a winnable race?
Yes.
You did?
I think it absolutely was a winnable race.
Even with all those factors?
With all the factors, the Five Eyes, I would add Israel into. All those things were huge headwinds, unquestionably. Yeah. But there was energy. You were out on the campaign trail, you felt it. There was something different happening. That said, I mean, in hindsight, we can look back and we can make a different argument because we're all experts and geniuses in hindsight. But going into election night, I was 60-40. She was going to pull it off. I felt the same way they felt. And again, everyone, people on the right watching, just rolling their eyes, laughing. I'm saying that I'm just being transparent and honest, and was going to be close. But she was really confident that sort of marked to 270, and Trump, meanwhile, was reasonably confident, cautiously, I think you quoted people saying, cautiously, sir.
He was nervous.
Confident. He was nervous that night.
He kept.
Well, he thought he was going to win in 2020.
Yeah.
Right. His team had told him if you hit a certain threshold nationally, right? If you get whatever the number was, 65 million votes nationally, you're president. And he hit that number and he lost. And the reason he hit that number and lost is because the increase in the Democratic number of votes in 2020 from 2016 was like 21%. The participation rate in 2020 was insane. Everybody was home. They had nothing else to do. They could vote early. States made accommodations for people to vote. And so Trump was, I think this is part of the reason that he kept going out there and saying that people were cheating. I mean, obviously it benefits him to say that and has continued to benefit him. But I think part of the reason is he was looking to explain what didn't make sense to him because he had lost in 2020 and been so shocked. And in this book, readers will, I think, be interested in spending those last few minutes with Kamala Harris. We take you inside her sort of personal quarters in the vice president's residence and what she's kind of concluding that night. And I think it's very powerful, and I don't want to wholly give that away.
The big bombshell, I think, is that she was gaslit by her own campaign. Meaning
they gave her no indication otherwise that she was going to get there.
Correct.
Even though their final tally, their final projection of the race had her losing.
Yeah.
And so that leads to our conclusion, the epilogue. And what's remarkable, the epilogue, is how contemporary it is to this moment we're actually sitting in, which suggests this thing either it keeps writing itself or you just quite literally finished this book. The lessons learned. The word gaslighting came up in this book over and over and over again, and how the American people may have felt. And I know there's other books being written in this space, and how people feel like, I imagine I'm among them, that people were not expressive enough about where Joe Biden was in terms of what was perceived or real as it relates to his physical health or cognitive decline. Yeah. I, of course, never experienced any of that, quite literally. So I would have been lying if I played to that, except one event, which you reference in the book, and that's the fundraiser, the infamous George Clooney fundraiser, where it was clear, and that for me, jet lag was as easy a way to describe that as anything else, but it was clear that something was a little bit off or different. But this notion of gaslighting the campaign from an analytics perspective, and in the sense that, and having conversations, particularly, we had the vice president or vice presidential nominee, Governor Walz, on this podcast. I mean, you're right. He was absolutely confident that they were going to pull this thing off.
Yeah, he can't find the words. I mean, we take you inside his hotel room at the Mayflower in Washington, and his wife has to say something because he went in so confident about their ability and the fact that they were going to win. Can't believe it. But I think there is a bigger discussion happening right now about...
So that's the epilogue. You talk about that.
Yeah.
What are the lessons learned? And what do you, as is independent, look, you have insight that's next level. I mean, I feel like you're two psychologists or something. You know more about us than we know about ourselves. You certainly know everyone's opinion about ourselves, which I can't even handle. That's I actually have to go to therapy for all of that. That's why
it's a good thing we cut the Newsom chapter out.
Yeah, no, I'm glad my name's barely mentioned. So it's thank you, by the way, for that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have you on. I couldn't. But what are the lessons learned? I mean, honestly, when you look at this, the Democratic Party, right now, I've had strong opinions about where I think our party is right now in terms of just truth and trust. This sense that we weren't being truthful, that's a perception that we were gaslighting the American people. They don't trust us on issues and policies and the ability to deliver. And if you're not winning on truth and trust, that's a brand that, as I've said, and I've gotten a lot of blowback for it, is a bit toxic at the moment. Yeah. But what do you think this moment represents? And And do you think it's important for folks like me that are current public servants that represent portions of the Democratic Party to really take this book and read it and reread it and take what lessons from it?
Yeah, I mean, we write these books for people to gain knowledge about what happened, but it's also a playbook about going forward and what Democrats and Republicans can learn. And one of the things I think they think is that, I mean, first of all, there needs to be some accountability, right? Like someone, either President Biden or someone close to him, has to come out and say, look, this is what happened. Because the Democratic Party can't move forward until people address what has actually happened. And voters, to your point, don't trust the Democratic Party right now. I mean, I think a lot of people think that the Republican Party obviously is gaslighting the American people right now too. But let's have a discussion about what happened in this past election. And then there needs to be some accountability on where the party goes from here, and speaking to voters and actually connecting to voters. So many of these people who've supported Trump used to be traditional Democrats.
I know.
And yet they lost their way.
Look, I think it's fundamentally one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is that I'm concerned that we're taking the wrong lessons or not even absorbing any lesson from these elections, including, by the way, just the anomaly that was a COVID election. It's one thing to take away the wrong lessons in a midterm. It's another to look at these general elections and not necessarily absorb a deeper understanding of what played an outsized role and what didn't structurally and organizationally. So
that's episode 2 of this podcast. We'll talk about our 2020 book, Lucky, that was largely ignored. It did not sell as well as this one has.
Which is the point you were making, that it was a lucky outcome.
Right. There was a pandemic in the middle of that election, and the president of the United States went out, President Trump, to a podium and said things that were untrue, that were wild, that underestimated the physical, the psychological and physical toll of the disease, and undermined himself a lot, while Joe Biden was, the way Republicans would say, is hiding in his basement, but largely was off the campaign trail. Right. And then he wins that election by a very narrow margin. And I think the Democratic response to it was, we crushed Trump, he's gone. Yeah. And the Trump response was, they barely beat me and I'm coming back. And so, I think that when you say that Democrats have lost trust, it's not just that they've lost the trust of Republicans and independents. If you look at the polling, they've lost the trust of a lot of Democrats too. Yeah. And the first thing for any party is to kind of rebuild its trust among its own and then sort of branch out. And I mean, I'm curious to see what the 2028 candidates do, and maybe you will shed some light on this or know some people who might, what they're going to do to modernize the Democratic argument for what the country should look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What are you doing with entitlement programs? What are you doing with taxation? What are the new technologies and how do they affect us? We haven't seen that yet.
No, we haven't. And we I think what Ezra Klein did, we his book Abundance, interesting. Sort of, there was it's a very not self-critical, but it is a very critical look at sort of progressive governance and accountability that also needs to be laid at the hands of all of us in these quote unquote blue states, and the ability to deliver big things in a way that's timely and efficient. Look, this book is timely, a remarkably efficient use of 263 plus pages. It is a great read, and I encourage anyone, whether you like politics, don't like politics, but you're just interested or want to know what world we're living in the context of the political life and leanings, this is a must-read. Fight. Amie,
Governor
Jonathan,
Newsom,
thank you for being here.
Wait, we have one question for you.
I refuse to answer. What is it?
What lesson would you take away from this election?
No, I think the lesson is we need to have frank and honest conversations, and there's no space for that. And so I have a tactical point.
This space is
and a conversation. But one of the things that, are we done?
We're not done.
We're not done.
People want to hear from you on this.
But I hosted the Democratic Governors Association for our winter event in Los Angeles. Not an indictment. These are amazing governors. It's a great organization, and it's played an outside role saving me in my recall campaign. I was so eager to have this conversation. Yeah. What the hell just happened? The entire 3 days was fundraising. And all of us as governors sort of desperate to find time to start to have an honest, reflective conversation. And you have some of those 28 candidates in that mix. You had Bashir there, you had Pritzker there, you have Whitmer there. By the way, there's 5 or 6 others likely to run. And all of them had their own unique experience on the road and stress-tested messages, heard that feedback. We have not had that conversation. I was so pleased to have Tim here, and he was the only exception, unsurprisingly, because he could regale us to a little bit of the inside of being out on the campaign trail and what it was like and how exhilarating it was for him, which I also loved too, that he loved being out there.
Yeah,
that was absorbing, I think, to all of us. There's a joy, and he felt that joy and that energy, and I think that was the disconnect. And so understanding that and minding that gap between performance and perception, where we are and where we're going, where the American people are, and where we are as a party. What is our party? Who are our leaders? You describe Obama, Clinton. Is it Pelosi? Is it Schumer? Is it Jeffries? Who is there a party? Is it the DNC? Is it Martin? All of that we need to work our way through.
Thank you.